Good evening to you and how you be. We have with us today the iconic New York sports talk show host, a legend on WFAN for more than 30 years since its inception, Captain Midnight, the Schmoozer. He's there. We're here. What is it already with these pretzels? We are going to talk a little SEINFELD and a little SPORTS under the covers with the legendary Steve Summers. Thank you, Steve.
And thank you guys for having me, that's for sure.
So, Steve, this is the second time I've spoke to you. I don't know if you remember this, but geez, 24 years ago, you came on a college sports talk radio show with me, Villanova. You probably don't remember it, but we talked a little. I think it was the time with the Knicks and the Heat. They had the big brawl. Do you remember?
Sure, with Van Gundy on the leg of Alonzo Mourning.
So you remember that, but you don't remember the show, right?
Oh, no, I don't even remember really what I had for dinner last night.
Well said. So, Steve, let's get to, listen, we know there's been a riff out there with Seinfeld, but let's just get to kind of the good stuff. Where did the friendship with Jerry start? We heard there was a story about a grocery store after an SNL. Can you shed some light on it?
Yeah, I'm not sure the year. It was like maybe 90, 91. And I was watching, you guys are right, I was watching Saturday Night Live, wasn't married at the time, single. And it was sometime in the summer, it was very, very hot. I watched Saturday Night Live. When it was over, I thought I would go right down about a half a block away to this bodega grocery store and get a pint of ice cream. And I was wearing shorts, wearing my Mets cap, wearing a T-shirt, had some sandals on, and as casual as can be. And it was still at like 1:30 in the morning, still very, very warm out. So anyway, I'm going to get some ice cream, and I see two guys standing, checking out the cereal. They, along with the cashier, they were the only two guys in the store. And I got the ice cream right away, noticed the two guys, one of them, Seinfeld, wearing a Mets cap. And I could only see a profile of him as they were both facing the section where all the cereal was on the shelves. And the other guy happened to be George Wallace. I didn't recognize him. What I found out later, around the block from where I live, there used to be a comedy club called Catch a Rising Star. And I found out later the two of them were in there, to be part of an audience for some young comedians they wanted to see. So it was after 1:30 in the morning, and they went into the store, get some stuff, I guess some cereal, and then go home. And anyway, so I kind of recognized with the right side of his head, because as I looked down the aisle, and again, the Mets cap was low on the forehead, maybe covering his eyebrows, but he still looked familiar to me. George Wallace, his friend, and another comedian, as you guys probably know, he I didn't recognize or know at all. But anyway, and I walked a little bit closer. I certainly didn't need anything more than the ice cream, so I wasn't looking for any cereal. But for some reason, just noticing with the bill of the cap low on the forehead, he still looked familiar to me. So I got a little bit closer, and I'm saying to myself, geez, this is Seinfeld. So I took a card, and I haven't had a card that says WFAN or my name on it since then. But anyway, I was kind of new at the station. I mean, I had started in 87. This was 91, 92. So it was a couple of years, and we had business cards. And I always thought that if I met a woman, that I would give a business card, until I realized that isn't really going to work. But I had a business card or two or three in my wallet, and I took one out, and I was going to walk up, which I did do, to this guy looking like Seinfeld, and I said right off the bat with a card in my hand now, because I didn't think he was going to know who I was. I didn't even know if he knew anything about WFAN other than the Mets cap he was wearing, didn't know what kind of a sports fan he was. I knew nothing other than he was a great stand-up comedian. And I said to him, "Are you Jerry Seinfeld?" He did not turn to his right to look at me. He was still looking straight ahead. And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Well, I just want to say I'm a fan of yours. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Steve Summers. I work at a brand new radio station." And as I was saying this, I handed him or extended my right arm with the card in it. He didn't make eye contact at all, looked a little low to his right, took the card, looked at the card, still not making eye contact with me at all. And I'd introduced myself. I said, "I'm Steve Summers. I work at a brand new radio station," et cetera, et cetera. And I said, "I'm a big fan." And he took the card, still with his body facing the cereal on the shelf, just a little nod to his right, never made eye contact, still looking down, took the card, looked up, looked over at me in the eye, and said, "You're Steve Summers? I listen to you every night." I almost went a number 2 in my pants. I really, it blew me away. I couldn't believe that. And my right leg might have been shaking. I don't know. I was a little bit intimidated, but I was absolutely shocked, seriously, that he knew my name, looked me in the eye, and said, "You're Steve Summers? I listen to you every night." And that's really how it started. And then he introduced me to George Wallace, and we spent a few minutes talking. And that following Monday night, he called in as Jerry from Queens, and it started, for a number of years, a relationship on the air, and a few times off the air where he would invite me to sit with him at a Mets game, which I did do. And he would call in as Jerry from Queens, even though he was Jerry from Manhasset. But the bottom line is that that's how I met him.
Interesting. Steve, that's I feel like it's so unlike you, right? You went up to a celebrity, but it's really interesting that he called that next Monday.
Yeah. Yeah. And even as a kid, I wasn't all that excited going to games, asking for autographs. That wasn't my kind of thing. And again, maybe arguably for fear of rejection, but I never was one for autographs, going to games, even when I would go with my dad as a youngster, or my uncle Tevis, my mother's brother, who lived upstairs from us in San Francisco, where I was born and raised, went to school, left San Francisco to pursue New York at the age of 19. So it took me a while to get here.
Yeah, let's touch on that, Steve, if you will. We want to kind of get a little bit of the history there in San Francisco. I know, you started there at KYA in San Francisco. You were still in high school, right? Like, how did that even
Yeah. Well, I presented an idea to them about high school sports, and this was a top 40 station, so all the kids listened to it. There were 2 top 40 stations in San Francisco at the time, and KYA was one of them. And I called them first, talked to the program director, thought it was an interesting idea. It was said, go to a couple of high school games and do a report on it, and we'll see what your voice sounds like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And because I was so young, and because I was also in high school, and because I listened to that radio station with all the top 40 hits that were going on at the time, they ended up hiring me, and I would end a newscast with a high school sports report. And that's where the Fearless Forecaster was born. And I still do that to this day at WFAN. And I'll give you one quick little story back then. and one Thanksgiving Day championship for, San Francisco high schools. You had a Lincoln High School versus a St. Ignatius High School. The quarterback for St. Ignatius was Dan Fouts, and the quarterback for Lincoln and turned out to be the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, also the offensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. And can you guess who I'm talking about?
Coordinator for the 49ers?
He was the offensive coordinator for the 49ers. Also coached the Seattle
Holmgren.
Seahawks. Yeah, right. And a good job on your part. And he also coached Seattle and so forth. So he was a quarterback for Lincoln High School, and Dan Fouts was a quarterback for St. Ignatius. And again, both of them turned out to be with quite an NFL career. And Fouts, of course, in the Hall of Fame.
Incredible.
Awesome. So, Steve, just quickly, you mentioned, you had the on-air stuff with Jerry, but he also invited you to games?
He wanted me to meet his wife and a couple of his friends. He has a suite now, but at the time I only went to 2 or 3 games with him on a Saturday. I met him at the game. I didn't go with him.
What are you talking to Jerry about at a game? You got to give us some inside baseball here, literally. What is sitting is that Shea, I'm assuming, not Citi Field, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, that happened on either a Saturday or a Sunday when I wasn't working, and I would meet him at the game, and all quite flattering. And let me just say this. And he also invited my wife and I, to see him in Atlantic City as a stand-up, and to be meeting him backstage where I met his agent, where I met his manager. I mean, it was quite impressive and quite flattering. I mean, not bad for the son of a grocer, and not working the morning show, not working midday. Although I did do midday on the Fan with Russ Salzberg for 5 years. From 95 to 2000, and that's a number of stories unto itself. I used to say that working with Russ Salzberg was like working with a member of the family, the Manson family, or the Addams family. But with Seinfeld, I mean, all of it was very, very flattering. And for a number of years, I mean, it continued on. But let me make it clear, never really a part of his inner circle. I mean, I wasn't all of a sudden becoming, his best friend. It was really more a radio relationship, a Metropolitan Mets relationship. And so it wasn't like, I was being invited over for dinner, or let's go to a comedy club, or let's go see a show. No. It was all business related. And if he had something that he wanted to promote, that's usually when he would call in. A lot of times I would make a call to him to come on just because a couple of months had gone by and we hadn't heard from him, and some callers were bringing it up, and he usually didn't have the time for that. So, but the bottom line is it went on for a number of years, and then when, of course, I asked him for the email of Larry David, and he had mentioned that he and Larry David wanted to come down to the studio one night, and that Larry David was also a fan, big Yankee fan as Larry David, but listened to WFAN, listened late at night, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, sure, anytime, although that never happened. But when Curb Your Enthusiasm was rolling along, and before the start of a new season, I had asked Jerry for Larry David's email, which he gave to me, and we had Larry David on. It was a fun interview, a terrific interview. Greg Giannotti was producing the show at that time, and so he could confirm how very good an interview it was. And Larry David was happy with it and was very complimentary at the end of the interview, said he would love to come on again, just call. So a year or two goes by, whatever it was, some time had gone by, and then I tried to email him again, and he had changed his email. So I emailed Seinfeld, and Seinfeld wouldn't give it to me, and that's the story that you guys are referring to. He wouldn't give it to me, and his response was, "That's not what friends do." Well, I'm saying to myself, that is what friends do. Even if we're only radio friends, he had given it to me, Larry David's email, at one time. How about a second time since it had changed? And Seinfeld did acknowledge that he had changed his email, but that's not what friends do, was his response. And I wrote back, I thought that is what friends do. I've had Larry on before, and because he's changed his email, I thought maybe you would provide it. And he repeated the same thing. It's not what friends do.
When was this, Steve, exactly?
A couple of years ago.
Oh, a couple of years.
Oh, a couple of years ago. Wow. Okay. We had thought it was more
Yeah,
recent.
and I never said anything about it on the air.
Al Dukes broke that story. How,
Yeah.
how do you think he found out about that?
Well, I probably told it to my producer at the time. It could have been Paulie Rosenberg. It could have been Peter Hoffman, and they are still producers. They don't work with me at the moment, but they're still there as producers. And I'm sure that I might have told one of them the story, maybe somebody else in the sales department, who might have asked me, when he could have Seinfeld on again, and so forth and so on, because the station always wanted to promote that. And I was all for that. I mean, in a way, that was like a shout out for me. That was a little publicity for me, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm sure, but I never said anything on the air. And because, it would have sounded maybe like sour grapes, or I'm trying to pick a fight. And I just thought that I would let it go as something between him and me. So I'm sure that's how Al Dukes found out about it, and then they mentioned it on the air, and then I got a call, of course, as you know, and here we are.
So this happened a couple of years ago. Interesting. So if that's the case, then you and Jerry have not had any correspondence since then, it sounds like.
No.
Furthermore, I mean, just recently, we saw somebody bring it up to Jerry, what we're exactly talking about right now, and they asked if there was any issues there with Jerry and Schmoozer, and Jerry said no. He just responded, nope, not an issue at all. So he doesn't think there's anything going on here. Maybe we need to, I don't know. This is interesting, because if it was a couple of years ago, maybe reach back out and we'll see how it goes.
Well, this is the first I'm hearing about him responding, because I don't care at this point. In other words,
Sure.
In the very, very beginning, I don't want to cut off my nose to spite my face, because not only did the station like having him on, but also some listeners. I will say that he never was really funny when he was on with me. And he came in one day, 2 days, he was in the studio with me, and he tried to prove more that he was a serious sports fan. And left the humor, outside the station. And I would try to bait him a little bit, try to get him getting into some funny stuff. And he really wouldn't respond that way. And he wanted to either talk about the Mets seriously so, or other sports seriously so, and never was funny. But still, it was Jerry Seinfeld, and still, it was terrific for all of us at the radio station that if he wasn't sitting in with us, he was certainly on the air and, promoted earlier in the day. Mike and the Mad Dog would have said something. And the first time he came into the station, Mike and the Mad Dog had me and Seinfeld on at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. for an hour, hour and a half, however long it was. And as great as it was to have him on, it wasn't very funny, and made for a little bit of a serious interview, which is okay too. I mean, he could do it any way he wanted to. All I was doing was, throwing things out to him where he could have responded in a funny way or take it seriously, and he took everything seriously, whether he was calling me later at night or even that very first time he came into the station, and Mike and the Mad Dog gave me the last hour, hour and a half of their program because it was Seinfeld. And the entire station, the sales department, the engineering department, the administrative assistants, the secretaries, part-timers had all congregated into the newsroom to meet Seinfeld. So it was quite a moment the first time he came on down.
Well, Steve, listen, between us, we'd rather meet you any day of the week, but it had to hurt a little bit, right? You guys you went on double dates, you went to Atlantic City, you went to Met games, I
was angry. I mean,
yeah.
After all, I heard a little bit, I guess, but it upset me more. I mean, maybe it shouldn't have, but it did, because it was ridiculous. I mean, I figured after all this time, and there were so many times, by the way, guys, where I would, call, and leave a message. He wouldn't return the call. Sometimes he would pick up, and we would talk, and I would ask him, you got 5 minutes? Let's talk about the Mets. Let's do this with Matt Harvey, whatever it may be. And he wouldn't come on, but he would call me when he had something he wanted to promote. And that's usually the way it was for the most part. And again, more a radio relationship. He listened to the fan. He didn't like some of the other programs. He didn't like the fact that I was taken off 10 to 1.
We agree. We agree with that, Steve.
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think I work better alone. What I would have liked is if they had teamed me with another partner. And Salzberg had worked by himself in that 10 to 1 spot for 2 years. And as Mike Breen, who was on the Ima show at the time doing sports, he said the only people listening to Salzberg was his family. And the idea of, I didn't even want to be taken off overnight. I was having a good time. All the shtick was working. I felt comfortable. I didn't think I was going to like it in the beginning. Nobody had ever done overnight sports talk anywhere. And this was, as you guys know, with WFAN, the first all sports 24/7. And I was the very first guy working midnight to 6. And it worked, and it was working. I used to call my mother and my father when they were alive in the very beginning saying, you're not going to believe it, but it seems like I'm not going to get fired, at least not too soon. Everything seems to be okay. Everything seems to be working. I'm getting automatic feedback, and people are calling in, and it's been a positive reaction. I was getting good press right away in the very beginning, more, and there had been no Mike and the Mad Dog yet, and no Imus yet. Greg Gumbel was the morning guy. Jim Lampley was the midday guy. And they didn't even care about radio sports in New York. They were just biding their time until they got their next TV gig. And I was getting a lot of positive reaction. And here I was in the middle of the night. And I'm sure, New York being 24/7 and the city that never sleeps, I didn't even realize in the very beginning that more than just, bartenders on the way home and late night people. I mean, the ratings were for an overnight program, very solid, and I was making a little bit of a name for myself and discovering my style. I'd always been pretty much the same, But I came to WFAN after 17 years of doing TV work. In fact, I was the very last hire at WFAN. They weren't sure if they were going to have live programming overnight, whether they were going to have syndicated programming overnight, or whether they were going to repeat daytime programming overnight when they finally decided 24/7, let's give it a shot with a sports talk program. And we were doing the shtick with the production pieces and sound effects and with music and, having a lot of fun. And it was sort of like, for me, and I had monologues for the top of every hour at midnight, at 1, at 2. It was 24/7 for me. And it was working. And you can work very hard, and you can do all the necessary research and preparation, and you can do as good as you can do with all the energy and all the passion, and still fail. So you have to be good at whatever it is you're doing, and you also have to be lucky too.
Yeah, and you were the best at what you were doing, Steve. And I was one of those people listening on the overnights. In 1989, I'm 11 years old, up at midnight listening to you, Captain Midnight. And this is incredible talking to you right now. But your monologues, you brought them up. I mean, your monologues with the music and just the way you weave it all together. It's poetry, it's comedy, it's incredible. You have that comedic, that comedic sense with those monologues is obvious there. I mean, I can see how, you definitely put the work in on them, and
Well, that's very, and I'll be honest with you, and it's not false humility at all. I mean, I'll kill myself if they don't work, and a lot of them don't work. And when they do, you feel like $1 million. That's for sure. When you hit all the right notes, and you mentioned something which is key. It's not so much the writing, because as you guys know in radio, people only hear anything you're saying once, although we all repeat things, of course. But if you're doing an opening monologue and you're writing it out, as I do, the bottom line is they're only going to hear it once. So the writing is not very fancy, because in radio you're writing for the ear. If you are writing for the eye, like for a newspaper, a blog, whatever it may be, you can reread a paragraph if it doesn't make any sense or you want to get clarity on it. But with radio, they're only going to hear it one time, unless you repeat the monologue later on. But for the most part, it really is more with the delivery. But I listen, and you guys are going to be very kind, of course, with the monologues, and some of them are good. They work. As I say, you hit all the right notes. But when they don't, I mean, it's just awful. So it's kind of risky doing it the way I do it. But I've never met a piece of paper I didn't like.
Steve, you mentioned overnight and kind of you're synonymous with that, but you took the gamble, you moved with Sweater, and that obviously created a career for Beningo, but you and the Sweater were great. Something I always wanted to ask, it was him or you always reference, and I know you're happily married now, the Hawker.
Oh, yeah, the Hawker from Hackensack.
Yeah, was that your I know you were a legendary bachelor. I actually knew I worked with a girl that supposedly dated you back in the early 2000s. But
I tell people I got married because I ran out of excuses.
but so is the Hawker? Is that your wife?
Yeah, her real name is Robin, and she really is from Springfield at New Jersey. And at one point, she did live for about a year in Hackensack. So I mean, the alliteration there, the Hawker from Hackensack, and she's still hawking. Although she's now the Hawker from Manhattan.
So we mentioned Salzburg. It seems like you had a good relationship with him. What about some of these other guys? Francesa, obviously people love to hear your relationship with him. What are your thoughts on Big Mike?
Robin has just come over to the phone here because she heard me say She's now the hawker from Hackensack. I'm doing my. She's got, I wish I could hear as well as she does. You know, she was upstairs. We don't have a McMansion, but we do have a little bit of a duplex. With and she's upstairs. She's on the phone. She's always on the phone with the sister or her mother, who is 91. And she's come down to make sure that I don't get out of line and say too many things.
If she wants to say hi, she can hop on if she wants to say hi.
And she's right here. Want to say anything?
He already said some things out of line.
Well, what did I say?
No,
Well,
no.
tell
It's
us-
fun.
He goes. He's going. Oh, it's all in fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll hear about it when this is over, guys. I am not the king of my castle.
None of us are.
Yes. But anyway, no, and I like to tell people that's probably what she objected to. It's a one-liner that I've even used on the air. I got married because I ran out of excuses. What is it?
So I guess Robin had to be impressed that, you know, while you were wooing her, you were bringing her to Shea Stadium with Jerry Seinfeld and wife, right?
Well, yeah, and we also were invited to see him, as I mentioned to you, in Atlantic City when he was doing a stand-up there, and sitting in the VIP. Robin was more comfortable. I was nervous, you know, getting that kind of treatment, going backstage before he was going to perform, and Jerry introducing Robin and me to his agent and manager and some of the other people putting makeup on him and all this kind of stuff. I was nervous. I mean, I really, I wasn't, you know, it just seemed like, what is going on here? I mean, is this me going through this? And then again, it was a lot of fun and very flattering, of course. I'll tell you this, more flattering to be on with you two now than it would be with him now. I'll tell you that.
Well, that's great to hear. And Steve,
Without speech.
we're without speech, and, you know, can we get his email, or is that what friends don't do?
Well, and he probably changed his email, so I don't get it anymore. No, I don't think. I mean, I don't. How did you find out? I mean, somebody was getting an email about any differences between the two of us, and he said no.
Yeah, that was posted to Twitter last week, and Jerry he typically doesn't engage much, but, you know, there's been so much talk on the morning show and on your late night show that someone flat out asked him, and he denied it. So we actually invited him on. Did he say no to that also? Yeah, he ignored
He
it.
didn't necessarily no, yeah, exactly. He just ignored it. But yeah, we gave a couple of invitations out, and yeah, we wanted to come on and, you know, bury the hatchet, if you will. But
well, see, there were a lot of times he didn't come on with me when I was asking him. So welcome to the club.
And you had ratings, Steve. That's the difference.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, you know, I don't know if I had the kind of ratings that the other shows had. You know, when you're working late at night, you don't have the same kind of audience that day parts are going to have. So, you know, but the bottom line is, you know, again, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would reach out, and he wasn't going to be coming on for one reason or another.
yeah, I mean, speaking of your audience, I mean, you have one of the, you know, most devoted audiences out there, I would say, on the fan at this point. I mean, we just going to get your take maybe on some of your favorite callers out there. You know, Miriam or Doris, Omar from Brooklyn. Who sticks out to you? Who's some of your you know, callers you really enjoy when they're calling in?
Well, it's anyone who doesn't complain about me. You know, lately I've been getting a couple of Trumplicans calling because they know that during this past summer, when there was no sports on, we were trying to follow with the virus and the COVID-19, And of course, the mask became political. The virus became political. And I never, even as a kid, growing up in the 60s, was very political at all.
Exactly.
And you had the Vietnam War, you had the Kennedy's assassination, JFK and Bobby, Martin Luther King, and there were people protesting, and then there were riots, and I mean, it was a terrible.
You were at Berkeley, during all that. You were in the heart of all that, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
You got any stories from that time that hate?
Well, other than I wanted, I was a broadcast major and broadcast communications, and wanted to become a sportscaster. If you looked at my high school yearbook, my graduation picture, it said ambition, New York sportscaster. Wow. And that was my dream. That was my goal. That was my destination. And when I first started, first night at WFAN, I said all of this and a little bit more. And over the years, people have seen that graduation picture with the ambition New York sportscaster there, because I thought New York sports was the cream of the crop. I thought broadcasting here was with the best, and it is best. And I love to say about New York, it's the best and the worst of everything. And if you can't find it here, you don't need it. And the bottom line is, it took me a long time to get here. And I used to say, and did say on the air, that the flight from California to New York is about 5.5, 6 hours. But that flight took me 22 years. So people ask me now, do you want to retire? And I say, how do you retire from talking? And it is still a passion, still something I so enjoy. I mean, the hours are crazy. There's no question about it. But I've always been a night person. Even when I was in school, I did most of my homework late at night, and, studied for exams late at night, and so forth and so on. So always been somewhat of a night owl. And I only need about 3.5 or 4 hours of sleep. So if I'm working these kinds of hours that I do, I can still get things done during the day.
And Steve, you've probably always been on California time, so you're okay there. But
go ahead.
You mentioned sports, and just to tie it back to Seinfeld a little bit, the actual show.
Yeah.
Some of our favorite episodes have the sports twist in it, right? Whether it's David Putty dressing up in the Devil's uniform, a lot of the Yankee references, even Keith Hernandez.
Oh, sure.
Were you a big, forget about Seinfeld, the comedian, like the actual show?
No, I wasn't a big fan of the show. I didn't think it was funny.
Really?
Yeah, I went over my head, I guess.
Your Honeymooners is your show, right?
Yeah, well, some of the episodes I did see that I could identify with, like with Hernandez, and I know Hernandez a little bit, and so we would talk about what it was like when he was doing the show, and he knows that I know that episode. But I didn't. Well, some of it, well, first of all, when that show was on, so was a lot of games. So I was always in the evening watching games, whether it was the Mets, whether it was the Yankees, whether it was the Knicks, whether it was the Rangers. So a lot of his shows, I would, like at the end of the first period of a Ranger game or in between innings, I might switch over to see a couple of minutes and then switch right back to the game. And I did not laugh out loud, and I know it was as popular as any sitcom that's ever been, but I didn't think it was anything close to the Honeymooners. I didn't think it was anything close to All in the Family, but it was a show about nothing, and I didn't get too many laughs out of it, to be honest with you.
So that's interesting. I mean, I thought that was, I remember hearing that from you once, but that's really interesting to.
Well, I know that's a little bit surprising. I
Yeah,
never.
everyone's got their taste. I mean, you can't argue with the honeymooners and All in the Family for sure. But
Oh yeah, but I'm just saying. I mean, but I understand how popular it was. If you talk to Richard Ackerman at WFAN, the update guy, he has just about every episode memorized. If you were to bring up to him any given episode, he'll recite the dialogue.
Yeah, that's our kind of fan. Speaking of those sports you were watching all those times, not watching Seinfeld. 94 Rangers, is that the highlight for you? Just trying to get your favorite New York sports moment, maybe. And
oh well, yeah, that and after 9/11 with the Piazza home run. I was at that Game 7 with the Devils, the Eastern Conference Finals, and I was at Shea the night that Piazza hit that home run 10 days after 9/11. I had tears in my eyes. In fact, everybody at Shea had tears in their eyes when Piazza hit that home run. That home run in that game, even with heavy heart, and you don't have to wait to 9/11 to remember all those who lost their lives and the first and second and third and fourth and fifth responders and all the people that made 9/11 as horrific and heroic as it was, and nobody ever forgets on any given day. But what that game with the Mets and Braves and the Piazza home run was to me, what it signaled, it was a sign that with heavy heart and with mourning and all the grieving, we could move forward in their memory. And that game, to me, was just that, a signal, a sign that, yes, with heavy heart, we could move forward, never forgetting those from 9/11, but we could now move forward, maybe because there was so much joy, and it was like a catharsis. It was, so needed, some joy, some excitement, some smile, some happiness, and with everybody with tears in the eyes, and how the Mets came back on the dramatic home run, again, we could now maybe not for families who may have lost loved ones, the mourning and the grieving will always be there, but I've always felt personally in losing my mother and my father that when you hear me, you hear them. And I remember when I first lost my mother, what my father told me, and he said she would be very upset if you spend the rest of your life grieving and mourning all the time. And she would be very proud of you if you continued to move forward in her honor. And when my dad died in 2003, I thought of what he said to me when my mother died in 94.
Well said, Steve. And I mean, from two Yankee fans here experiencing that Piazza homer, we completely concur. And I remember getting my parents tickets to the '01 World Series. And again, to your point, emotion. People were hugging strangers. It was
yeah, that was insane.
a moment that you can't. Amazing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I understand, because it does take your breath away, and it can make you speechless. Again, it was a moment, really, not just a Met moment per se. It was a New York City moment, and the Yankees certainly did their part. They were on the road when they were going to play next. The Mets were not. And you got when the Yankees did just as much for everybody, for the city of New York. I mean, the Yankees front and center, along with the Mets. Whether it was just helping families, talking to families, et cetera, et cetera. Both the Yankees and the Mets did the right thing after 9/11.
Are you, Steve? Are you, like, again, I think that was just classic New York, camaraderie, getting together. Are you still into sports the way you were? I mean, the nonsense, the Harden, Deshaun Watson, all these guys demanding trades. I know this existed years ago as well, but are you as into it as you were 20 years ago?
That's a great question, because I think Benigno ran out of gas. He was talking on the air about retiring, playing golf, going to Florida. I still care. It still means something to me. And it keeps me young in a way. And again, how do you retire from talking? And obviously you have bad shows. There are days you don't want to get out of bed, days you don't have the same energy, not as much excitement to talk about per se, as opposed to other days, other nights. So, but overall, as a sports fan and as a broadcaster, and having, it took me 22 years to reach a dream, a destination, a goal, and I don't want to give up on it just yet. It still matters to me. It's still something I care about, and passionately so. I'm excited to see the Mets. Tonight, they're this close to getting Trevor Bauer with the latest news that I was hearing right before coming on with you guys. So the Dodgers may come with a last second offer, but the Mets, from what I'm hearing, have offered a 3-year contract for around $100 million with a first-year opt-out, so that the first year might be somewhere for Trevor Bauer in the neighborhood of $37 million, and he could opt out after that 1 year, or he could stay on in year number 2 and year number 3 for around $31.5 million to make it $100 million over 3 years.
That's Francesa money, Steve.
It is. It is.
So you just mentioned, Steve, you still have actually obviously have the passion still and the want. Is working from home right now helping that or hurting that? I mean, do you want to get back in the studio? Is it more energy there? Are you feeling it more there? Or is it actually kind of nice to just kind of...
Well, you get used to it. That's also a good question. You get used to it. I can't always see about the callers on the line. So there are technical issues that come into play. But I used to, because I got off late, I used to drive into work and then drive home if I was getting off at 1 or getting off at 2 or getting off at 5, or 6. So I would drive home. Now I tell people I get 3 weeks to the gallon of gas.
That's a good point.
So that's a benefit. So I'm home. And this last summer, I tell people I did some traveling. And so people would ask me where I traveled. I traveled from the kitchen to the bedroom, from the bedroom to the bathroom back to the kitchen, back to the computer room, and so forth and so on. That's the kind of traveling. But the bottom line is that, there are advantages to being at home, but I do miss socializing with the people at work. I miss seeing the friends that I have there and the co-workers that I have there. And it's really more, if you're there at the station, it really makes you feel like you're really on the radio instead of in the kitchen.
Steve, speaking of work, WFAN's been very gracious to this podcast. Who are some of your best friends? Eddie Scazzari comes to mind. You mentioned
Bob Husler and I are very good friends.
Mr. Met.
Mr. Met, yeah, Mr.
Met. Oh, yeah, Mr. Met. We're very good friends. We've gone to games together, and talk during the day on occasion and so forth and so on. And he did some work at Yale University, and a couple of years ago had me speak to some broadcasting students at Yale at Davenport College, which is a part of Yale University. And that was a highlight. No, Bob and I are very, very good friends, and we talk shop, and I knew his family very well, and he knows Robin very well, and we've gone to games together, talk shop, the whole thing. And but most of the guys there know how much I need their help and how much help they provide. And the guys on the other side of the glass or on the other side of the kitchen, I need their help, and we'll talk about them and help them in any way I can, whether some over the years looking for other jobs. I want them to use me as a reference, because when I was a kid, some of the veterans in the business did that for me. And I know that nobody could do it alone. I don't care if you're Howard Stern. I don't care if you're Imus. I mean, today you guys can do your own technical, and I'm not as technically as literate as I should be, but I get help with producers and board operators. I mean, you can't do it alone if you're doing, this kind of radio. So I appreciate all the help I get. That's for sure.
Of course. In your 30 plus years on the Fan, what sticks out to you as one of your favorite interviews there with someone you've had, or a get that you got and you were happy with? Like, for us, this is our biggest get we could get. So I'm asking, who was one of your biggest gets or your best interviews that you thought you might have had?
Well, I don't even know if I've done a best interview. I mean, there have been a lot of it. That's a great question also, guys. And Phil Rizzuto twice was a great interview, and he kept calling me Schmoozer the whole way through. Early on, Larry David, of course, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Y.A. Tittle, the former Giants quarterback. John Ziegler Jr. was maybe the most notable interview I've ever done, and that was the first year I was at the station. He was the commissioner of the NHL, and he was scheduled to be on with Howie Rose at 10 o'clock in the evening, and he didn't call in. And Howie did his show saying, well, I guess we're not going to have the commissioner of the NHL on. Well, he called me about 1:30 in the morning, completely drunk, and I wanted to talk to him about the 3 hockey teams in the area. And he kept saying, you're asking personal questions. And I'm saying, no, I'm asking questions because here in New York, we have 3 hockey teams. And I'm only asking what the fans would be asking you. And he kept saying he was going to hang up. And I kept saying, don't do that. We have listeners who are fans of 3 hockey teams in New York City. And mine was new, and I didn't want to get fired. I wanted to follow through. I was wanting him to stay on the line. I was sweating. For an hour and a half, I was begging him to answer these questions when he kept threatening throughout the hour and a half that he was going to hang up on me. Well, to make a long story short, eventually he was fired as commissioner of the NHL, and part of that firing was because of him being inebriated with me on the air at WFAN, and this was in the spring of 1988, so the station wasn't even a year old, and they replayed the interview the next day during the daytime, the entire hour and a half, with me begging him to stay on the line and him thinking that my questions about officiating, about the Rangers, about the Devils, about the Islanders, they were too close to home. I should be more of a homer, more of asking more positive questions. I don't like your attitude. I don't like your questions. I'm going to hang up. And I said, no, don't do that. I'm asking these questions because these questions would be asked by the hockey fan of New York City. So I'm asking for them and trying to get any kind of response from you as possible. And he goes, I don't like your attitude. He was inebriated. And that made part of the dynamic of the interview.
I mean, that's what's special about you, Steve, is, you know, especially working overnights, you probably get a lot of inebriated calls. But not
as many as you think. I do get some, yes. But you'd be surprised of how articulate. I've been surprised the last couple of nights. But again, you know, you guys are right. No, you get the inebriated, you get a little crank, you get the crank calls and so forth and so on. But I'm surprised that a good many of them are articulate calls from very passionate fans.
Yeah, well, I think that's the respect you've built, to be honest. And I think you go back to '88. That's when it was 10:50 a.m., which we go back to. I think about you. I mean, you mentioned meeting Jerry actually back in like '91. He didn't know who you are. He didn't know who you look like, and we didn't know what you look like either. I think so much has changed, right, since the internet era, and now.
Oh, sure.
You kind of have this. I didn't know what Mike. I thought Mad Dog looked like Danny DeVito in my head, you know. But
they had the greatest sports talk radio program I've ever heard.
You think so?
They were appointment listening. I thought the two of them were great in their prime, and Russo is still going on and strong, and Francesa ran out of gas, obviously, but needed to retire. And he's also had gas a lot from all the coke he was drinking. But the bottom line is best radio show, best sports talk radio program I've ever heard.
Yeah, and they had a great lead-in with Sweater and the Schmoozer. But do you ever get? I mean, now that people know what you look like do you get stopped on the street with you?
It happened today when I went out to do a little bit of grocery. It doesn't happen very often, really. You know, people will recognize the voice if I'm talking to a bank teller, the person behind me. Are you Steve Summers? But it happened today on the street, and I'm wearing a mask. I got my winter coat on, you know, with a turtleneck underneath, and wearing my black mask. And somebody stopped me on the street today. Really seriously, very flattering, of course. And they gave me the thumbs up and the schmoozer, they're saying, and you do a nice job, and that was about it. But how flattering. But and take my word, it doesn't happen very, very often. And again, over the years, you know, I'll tell you where it did happen a lot, going to Shea Stadium. And once went to a game where I was going to sit with Evan Roberts and his father, and everybody was coming over to get an autograph. I was sitting in a seat that normally Evan's sister would be sitting in, but she was in Florida in school, and so I sat in her seat, and everybody came, and Evan was very new. He'd be getting all the autographs now, but one after the other was coming over, and Evan later that day with his dad saying, yeah, I was like a rock star. And if I went to the bathroom, I was followed. If I went to a concession stand, I was followed. And if I went to a game with Husler, I was followed. With Robin, I was followed. So that was where I was really recognized more than anything else. But every now and then, A cab driver, if I was taking a cab for whatever reason, I normally take the subway, take a bus, but if I had to take a cab, most of the cab drivers would recognize the voice. Sometimes at a checkout, you know, at a grocery store, at a supermarket, any checkout at any store, if there was any conversation with me and the checkout person, somebody in line would recognize the voice. But it doesn't happen all that often. Not really. Take my word.
Yes. So you're in San Francisco. Like you said, it took you 20 something years to get to New York. And that was, you know, your goal, even back then. So how did that New York connection, you know, kind of start with you out there in San Francisco as a kid? Like, what's Steve Summers as a kid doing? What is he thinking? Is that your goal to get to New York? And how did that kind of?
By the time I was in high school, I knew right from the get-go what I wanted to do and where I wanted to do it. And people thought I was from back east when I was in high school. Some might think New York, but back east was what I heard a lot. You originally from back east, and I was sarcastic all the time, a little bit abrasive all the time, had a big mouth all the time. And when you're young and you have a big mouth and you get older, they call it talent. So, but it was my humor, and I think being ethnic, where people were saying to me, "Are you from back east?" In a Spanish class in high school, if we saw flies on a warm day with the windows open, while the Spanish class was going on with the teacher, and I could see some flies, I'd raise my hand and be called upon, and the teacher would say, "What is it?" And I go, "I see these flies. Are these Spanish flies?" You know, that kind of thing. So I'd get a few chuckles out of the class. Teacher would reprimand me, and you know, save the humor for recess, and so forth and so on. I thought it was like a nice connection. If you're in a Spanish class and you're seeing some flies from outside coming into the room, would they be Spanish flies, possibly? Yeah. So
we'll wrap with this, Steve. We just want to. Well, first off, thanks for joining the show.
We couldn't.
Unbelievable.
Thank you so much.
If there's any message you want to send Jerry, you let us know.
Well, first of all, guys, thank you very much for having me on. That means a lot. And if Jerry wants to call me, there's a good chance I'll take the call. Thanks, guys.
That's the spirit.
After midnight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. Have a good night.
You too.
Love you, Steve.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.